I'm so happy that Dr. Joseph is here today. He and I have known each other for a real long time. And so that's always very important. I try to bring all of my comrades and friends, those of us who are in the struggle here, to the university. And as you know, over the course of time, we've had just about everybody who is someone here, including my teacher, Dr. John Henry Clark, and just everybody who's been somebody has been here. And on occasion, I do lecture myself. Everybody who was here probably know last year I did a major lecture here in terms of Egyptology, which is what I do on Hatshepsut, which was well received here at the university. So let me just read a little bit of our guest speaker's bio, and then we can get right to it, because again, time is of the essence. Brother, our doctor friend, Jemal Joseph, is an American writer, director, producer, poet, activist, and educator. Joseph was a member of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. He was prosecuted as one of the Panther 21 and spent a number of years incarcerated at Leavenworth Penitentiary. And of course, those of us who have been in the struggle find ourselves put in very precarious situations at times. And as I always say to people, generally there is no reward for struggle. We do it because we must. Jemal served 5.5 years in Leavenworth, where he earned 2 college degrees and wrote his first plays. Now, he earned 2 college degrees in prison. There should be no reason why you can't earn your degree here. All right, and a part of your education, of course, is how you educate yourself. I often tell people, and you've heard me lecture outside right away, part of your basic education, and probably your most fundamental education in terms of getting education would be to liberate your language. You know, one of the things you can do is remove the N-word from your language. You're on your way right there to liberating yourself, understanding the context in which that word is placed. Now, again, there is a place for that word. We'll talk about it another time, but it ain't a part of your central understanding, your thinking. All right, there's a place for that word, but not as a part of your central understanding of who you are. To this date, he has written 5 plays and 2 volumes of poetry. He's earned his BA, summa cum laude, from the University of Kansas while at Leavenworth. His first position after incarceration was at Touro College in East Harlem. While he was instrumental in arranging for historic graduation ceremonies at the Apollo Theater with a graduation address by Ossie Davis, preceded by a spectacular graduation procession down the middle of 125th Street. He is a full professor and former chair of Columbia University's Graduate Film Division and the artistic director of the New Heritage Theater Group in Harlem. By the way, if you need to go see some of his works, and normally, quite often, you'll see that the Mist and other places in Harlem, and a lot of my friends are involved with that, Abi Odun, Oye Wule, and a whole bunch of us. We do that, so you need to check out his work. He has been featured on HBO's Def Poetry Jam, BET's American Gangster, and on Tupac Shakur's The Rose That Grew from Concrete Volumes 1 and 2. He is the author of the interactive biography on Tupac Shakur Legacy. Jemal was nominated for a 2008 Academy Award in the Best Song category for his contribution to the song Raise It Up, performed by Impact Repertory Theater and Jamia Nash in the 2007 film August Rush. His memoir, Black Panther Baby, was published in February 2012 by Algonquin Books. So without further ado, let me bring our brother up, our friend, our activist, our teacher, our scholar, Brother Jemal Joseph.
No, that's good. Thank you, Dr. Conyers. How much time before students have to get to class?
Well, some will be leaving. Just talk. So
what
we'll
about?
I would say about 40 minutes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we'll chat a bit and try to leave a moment for questions. Thanks, everyone. There was a young man from the South who grew up in a small town and then came to New York to go to college and to go to law school. So he became an attorney. He went back down to a small southern town to visit. And as was the custom of his family, he went to church that Sunday. And there was a missionary woman in the church named Sister Jenkins, who was an elder. And he was reminded that Sister Jenkins had a reputation for not saying a bad word about anybody. It had been a long time since he had been home. and he'd been living in New York, and now he was a lawyer, so he had to put this to the test. So he went around and kind of got a little bit of gossip of what was happening in the church. After service, when they're having the meal, the little reception down in the church basement, he says, Sister Jenkins, how are you? She says, I'm just great this morning, praise the Lord. He says, Sister Jenkins, what about Sister Mary? And everybody knows that, that Sister Mary was sleeping with one of the deacons that wasn't her husband. She said, oh, Sister Mary's great. She always makes the best pies and cakes for the bake sale. There's nobody like her. He said, what about Deacon Brown? Everybody knows that Deacon Brown had a drinking problem, right? 6 days a week till it came time to open the church. And he says, oh, Deacon Brown, he's always here first thing Sunday morning to clean up and open for Sunday school. Went down the whole list, could not get her to say a bad word about anybody. And finally he said, well, what about the devil? And she just smiled and said, well, you know, he's always busy. She had an attitude about community and about who she was and an awareness of what was needed in her community to keep a positive thought and to keep a healing. She was also aware that there are always forces at work to kind of break down that community, to break down that love, and to break down that healing. So I know the theme is activism and unity in this age of Trump. I wanted to put some context on my background as a young member of the Black Panther Party. The event that really radicalized me and made me angry was the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And this was true of a lot of us. Yes. I was 15. And so after Dr. King was killed, I was at a community center that we both used to go to called the Ministering Townhouse. And instead of going home as instructed, I went to 125th Street, got caught up in the fringes of the rebellion, rescued by some brothers who were active, and then was so angry that Dr. King had been killed by a white guy when the reports came down that I went to school the next day and sat with my buddies, and we were hall monitors, and so that meant that you sat at a table, you got to leave class soon, and you stood in the hall. Nobody listened to you, but, you know, we were at this hall monitor table, and I announced to my friends that I, Eddie Joseph, didn't have the name Jemal yet, was going to be a black militant, that what they did to, like, Dr. King was just dead wrong, and that I was going to be a black militant. And one of my buddies that would eat lunch with me every day was actually a white kid named Paul Kirshner. And Paul looked at me and he said, Eddie, I don't know if you can announce you're going to be a black militant like it's a career choice, like you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. I was like, no, Paul, you wrong. You watch. You check out what's happening on. So as much to prove to Paul as to myself, I had to have the most militant group on the scene. And it was fate would have it, a few days later, on television, they were talking about this rising black militancy in America. And there were people like H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael calling for black power. And there was a story on this group called the Black Panther Party. And the Panthers had began organizing in Oakland, California. And they were patrolling the streets of Oakland with shotguns and law books. And there was a law at that time in California that any citizen could own and carry a weapon as long as it was a rifle or a shotgun, if it wasn't concealed. The California state legislature responded by changing the gun laws, because they said when we said that every citizen could carry a gun, we didn't mean these militants with leather coats and berets. The Panthers responded to that by storming the state capital, Sacramento, with guns. And it made national news, as you can imagine. People were sitting there, and then, you know, the white legislatures were ducking underneath the table. The news reporters were talking about the ultra-militant Black Panther Party. And the Panthers, you know, read their manifesto about the right of people to defend themselves. And then the reporter said, the police stopped the Panthers' car and looked in the trunk, and they found guns and they found communist literature. And I'm watching this sitting on the couch looking at my grandmother's TV, and I'm saying, they're crazy. They got leather coats, they're carrying guns. The man said they're communists, they're crazy. I want to join. Because when you're 15, that's it. So as we're riding out to the Panther office, I'm with two older guys who didn't quite know what it was, but we just know that we had found the secret headquarters of the Black Panther Party. Now, you found out later that the Panther headquarters was anything but secret. It was a place where food was given away, clothing was given away, there was free health clinics, there was all kinds of community political education classes, but we were going to the secret headquarters of the Black Panther Party. And so as we're riding out on the train, one of my friends, I was the youngest, one of my friends leans over and he says to me, yo, man, you know the Panthers is like the mafia, right? Once you get in, there's no getting out. And I'm thinking, there's no getting out. But I can't be a punk in front of my boys. I'm like, I don't care. The other brother leans over and he says, you know you're going to have to prove yourself to be a Panther, right? Got to kill a white dude. I'm like, kill somebody? I'm in the church choir. But I couldn't be a punk. I was like, I don't care. The other guy leans over. He says, nah, man, get it straight, man. You ain't got to kill a white dude. Oh, I was so relieved I didn't have to kill anybody. He was like, you got to kill a white cop. And you got to bring in his badge and his gun. So by the time we get to the Panther office, as you can imagine, I'm shaking. I think they were hoping that I dashed off the train and they, would come behind me. But we all arrive at the Panther office, and we're sitting in the back row, and there's something called the Panther Political Education class. And I'm looking at all the cool older brothers and sisters with the leather jackets and the dashikis and the galays and the army fatigue jackets. Now, to put it in perspective, to your point, sister, they were older to me because I was 15. But they were 18, 19, 21, 22 years old. The average age of somebody in the Black Panther Party, average age in the movement for that matter, was about 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. The brother behind the desk that was running what we call a political education class was explaining the Panther 10-point program. And if you Google it, the Black Panther Party 10-point program, 1966, it'll come up, and it says stuff like, we want freedom, we want the power to determine the destiny of our community. Number 2 is we want full employment for our people. 3, an end to the robbery by our black community by the capitalists. Number 5 is about education. We want an education that teaches us our true history and our true place in American society. Nothing in there about killing white folks, bringing in cops, badge, and gun. I'm not hearing this. I'm pumping myself up, my little adolescent brain. I want to prove that I could be a black militant. I jump up in the middle of this and I said, choose me, brother, me. I kill a white dude right now. The whole meeting gets quiet. The brother kind of tilts down his glasses and looks at me. Everybody's looking at me. He says, come here, young brother. And as I walk up, I stand beside the desk. And as I stand beside the desk, the brother pulls open the bottom drawer of the desk, and he's reaching around inside. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, look how far down he's reaching in that desk. He's going to give me a big damn gun. And he fishes around, brothers and sisters, and he gives me the secret weapon to liberation. Didn't give me a gun, he gave me a stack of books. It was the autobiography of Malcolm X, Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver, Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., Wretched of the Earth by Fanon. And I'm standing there thinking about what my friends had told me that it would took to be a Panther. And I'm standing there with these books going like, he gave me some books. I didn't come here for no books. If I wanted books, I wouldn't have played hooky from school to come out here. So I figured it's a test. So I looked at him and I said, excuse me, brother, I thought you were going to arm me. And he said, excuse me, young brother, I just did. And as I'm walking back to my seat, he says, young brother, let me ask you a question. Since you came in here so angry at white folks. He said, if all of the cops that are in the community, the racist police that are out there brutalizing people, beating people up, locking people up, shooting people down, if all of them were black and the people being brutalized were white. He said, if all of the people who own the businesses in the community that are ripping the community off with high prices, spoiled vegetables, rotten meat, if all of them were black and the people being ripped off were white, he said, these jive-time, demagogic, lying, fascist politicians, if all of them were black and the people being exploited and oppressed were white. Would that make things correct? And I thought about it, and I said, no, sir, it seems like it would still be wrong. And he said, that's right, brother. Really pay attention to this. This is a class struggle for human rights, not just a race struggle for civil rights. Study those books so you understand what the revolution is about. And the Panthers had a greeting that they would open and close meeting in all of the rallies, and no one did it more poetically than Brother Fred Hampton in Chicago, who I have the privilege of writing a screenplay about right now. And Fred Hampton would come out and he would say, all power to the people, and people would say, power to the people. And Fred would say, that means black power to black people. He says, but that means white power to white people. It means brown power to brown people, red power to red people, yellow power to yellow people, and Panther power to the vanguard. And you would say, well, what are we doing at a Black Panther Party rally and they're talking about white power to white people and brown power to brown people? Because when we talk about the people, we're talking about the oppressed masses. And when you look at who is oppressed by a system that is based on profit, and it's based on the idea that people can be property, you'll see that there are more white families on welfare today than there are black families. There are more white families living in poverty today than black families. And then when we go across the rainbow to brown, to red, to yellow, everyone is suffering. And especially today as the divide has gotten bigger. Now, the other context before we land back, hopefully soon, on the age of Trump is to look at slavery, because this is a real issue and it is a real kind of original sin of the American government and something that we really are still wrestling with and talking about, because we have seen other places where there has been slavery and where there has been oppression, where there has been truth and reconciliation, where there has been reparations, where there's been a whole lot of things to deal with it, and we still kind of as a country haven't dealt with it, and people of color still haven't dealt with it. And you know, it's acknowledged that there's a condition called post-traumatic slave syndrome. Post-traumatic stress syndrome used to be kind of just held and reserved for people that had been to war. That was a World War II or Korean War or Vietnam veteran. But you start realizing when you live in conditions of high stress and where the idea of mortality is so high. So we're dealing with medical mortality. We're dealing with the rate of mortality of young men in the black community. I think the chances of a young man being killed in the black community, especially if you look at places where things are out of control like Chicago, is 10 times greater than if that same young man was projected back in time and was given a gun and fought on the front lines of World War II. That's war zone. That's what we deal with. But slavery can't be separated from the system that created it. It was a business. The first slaves in this country were what? They were white. They were indentured servants. Back in those days, if you ran out of money, it wasn't just like duck the credit card company, don't pick up that phone, that's the credit card company. People would come get you, throw you in prison. And you were in a really bad situation because no one was going to come bail you out. You couldn't bail yourself out. If you had money, you couldn't get out. And one day somebody would open the door going like, listen, here's your only way out. Walk down the street to the pier, get on that boat, we're taking you someplace called America, and you could work for 3 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years, according to the size of that debt, and you could be free. But what happened was, this is before fingerprints and photographs, Facebook, Instagram. So if you were white and you could slip away, you could easily make a new life for yourself by going north or going to another town. And if you were someone in the farming business, in the plantation business, you woke up and your laborers were going, this wasn't working out so good, because the whole idea of having indentured servants and slaves was that cheap labor makes me rich. Free labor makes me rich. I wake up and my white laborers are gone. I'm on vacation with my family in Boston, and there's a guy I recognize in the blacksmith shop saying, hey man, weren't you my indentured servant back in Virginia? And the guy speaks with a fake accent and says, no, my name is Benjamin the blacksmith, sir. And I've always been the blacksmith. Well, that didn't work out. So I go back to the person that sold me the slaves going like, buddy, that didn't work out so good. You told me I'd get rich quick. And you said, okay, I know this is a good market. I know we can make money doing this. What I learned from that is that we have to identify our property. And so they were the Native American people, the First Nation people. They were people of color. We could identify them. We'll enslave them. Well, the First Nation people said, wait, time out, my brother. Didn't I like save you from starving a few winters ago? Teach you how to farm, teach you how to, and now you're saying like on my land where I live, I'm going to be a slave. I don't think so. And so they fought. And those that were captured, many would go on a hunger strike and starve to death rather than to be a slave. All right, I'm back. Buddy, that didn't work out. They burned down the plantation. My cousin got, I'm on the run. You tell me I can get rich quick. Second lesson. Your first lesson, be able to identify your property. Second lesson, it's hard to enslave someone on their native soil. And then the bell clicks. African people, we can identify them. We can bring them away from their native soil. They'll look up and the stars will look different. The air will smell different. The earth will feel different. They will know. And to add to the confusion, we will mix them up. We know that hundreds of languages are spoken. So we'll put people who speak Bantu with people who speak Yoruba. We'll put Yoruba with other people who speak Mandinka. And so in order to communicate, they'll have to learn our language so we can hear exactly what's going on. And the other thing that we learned from a guy named Willie Lynch is that that's not enough. We have to be not only the slave makers, we have to have slave breakers. Because what we learned from the native people is that they were saying, not only is this our land, but we are warriors. We are medicine people. We are healers. We are mothers and fathers. We are farmers. So we have to remove any idea or sense of who they were. They're slaves now. We can't let them sing their songs, practice their faith, and certainly can't let them talk about who they were. If you thought you were a prince, or you thought you were a doctor, or if you thought you were a scholar, you can't do any of that. You can't write anything down. You can't scribble in that native language, and you won't do it in our language. Because they understood that in order to really keep chains on the body, you have to first keep the chains on the mind. It's why the punishment would always be public punishment. If somebody did something wrong, it was no private scolding. There was no meeting in the boss's office. Let's have a job review, Jemal, about how you're doing out there in the field, right? Let's go over it. We'll write this up. I'll give you a letter. I expect you to improve in the next time we have a job review. No, it would string me up and beat me until I was bleeding in front of everyone. If I tried to escape, it was to beat me until I was bleeding, if not lynch me, tie me to horses, pull me limb from limb, let them know publicly, live with the fear of God, and certainly live with the fear of the white slave masters. We will murder you for rebelling. We'll make an example of your women. We'll beat them. We'll rape them. We will cut the unborn children out of their womb and crush their skulls with a boot. That was the terror. So when we talk about that trauma, but also understands what that means to be less than. There's one more piece that's very important. And it was the whole marketing strategy to people, because once you have a product, you realize that you want to grow from what they call a boutique business to a massive business, right? Someone has a great little restaurant and they realize I can make it bigger. If it becomes big enough, they realize I can open another one across town. Maybe I can go national. So with this idea of really making money from this slave labor, they had to market it in the same way they did with the automobile. Every American can have a car, right? There'll be a car in every garage and a chicken in every pot. Gathered in the slave market. Now I have people out there who may not have a big plantation but have a farm. Maybe they don't need 50 slaves or 100 or 300 slaves like George Washington had. Maybe they just need 1 or 2. Good white people, look at these African slaves. They're healthy, they're strong. Oh, I see the doubt in some of your faces. because some of you read in certain parts of the good book that slavery is wrong. But you know me. I'm your neighbor. I worship with you every Sunday morning. I read the good book too. And I know what it says about enslaving another man. But I have news for you, good white people, good white neighbors. These Africans that you see behind me are not human. They're less than human. So that owning an African slave is no more of a sin than it is to have a horse, a mule, a cow, or a chicken. In fact, the good book wants you to work hard and prosper. So it is a good thing. And so racism became a marketing tool of an economic structure. This is important to understand in the age of Trump. It was important to understand for slavery. It was important to understand the Civil War was about economics as much, or more so even more than it was about the institution of slavery. The North was industrializing. The South had an agricultural economy. Something had to give. A shift had to happen. War happened. And so when you look at wars that have fought, it is always about the land. It is always about the economy. It is always about the money. And when you look at what happened to slavery and the institutions of slavery, it is connected. Let's connect it up to Black Lives Matter. Let's connect it up to police brutality. When we talk about what's going on, and the Panthers took the original stance against police brutality. Point number 7 of the Black Panther Party program. We want an immediate end to police brutality and the murder of black people. It wasn't the only point, but it was a key point, and it was something that the Panthers realized that we could get out and organize around because no one was standing up to the police. And certainly no one had this idea that you could stand there with shotguns and law books and inform a person of their rights and let the police know, I'm watching you, and if you brutalize this person, we will defend them, and if you come to us, we will defend ourselves because we have a constitutional right to do so. And in cities where Panthers couldn't carry guns, we were still there, writing down badge numbers, forming that line between the police and what was going on, and educating people in the community that with unity you can stand up. The slave patrols that I mentioned earlier that would go out and catch runaway slaves were empowered to capture, to beat, to kill. The same as our law enforcement. Their mission was to go retrieve runaway or stolen property. Understand this. You can't treat another human being a certain way if you recognize them as a human being. But if someone is less than human and their property, then everything is fair game. The institution of policing comes out of those slave patrols. The idea that people in the community, if you see a runaway slave, they are here to kill you, to murder you, to rape your woman, to do terrible things, so turn them over, is deeply embedded in the American psyche. And so policing in the black community has become about containing a threat to property. This is why it was certainly true, back in the day, still true in many areas, when our grandmothers would call and say, there's somebody at my window trying to come into the apartment, the police might come a half hour later, if at all. But if a white store owner in the black community said, there's some black guys across the street that look like they're thinking about robbing my store, the cops would be there before they could hang up the phone. And so the idea of containment, the idea that the community has to be encircled and that people have to be surveilled and that people have to be controlled a certain way is connected to this idea. The new slavery, as Sister Michelle Alexander talks about, is the prison industrial complex. As Dr. Conyers mentioned, I spent time in prison. And every prison that I spent time in had a robust industrial program where they would make not just license plates, but furniture, uniforms for the military, fiber optic cables, clothing, recyclables. So another piece of homework one was to Google the 10-point program of the Black Panther Party. Google businesses that are doing business with prison. The list will absolutely blow your mind. We're talking about companies like Verizon, Starbucks, Victoria's Secrets, Target. It goes on and on and on. And they make a lot of money because it is modern-day slave labor. Prisoners make money, but it starts at 25 cents an hour, and maybe if you're lucky, it'll get up to $4 or $5, and you think you're making money. You have some people who are able to send money home. You have some families saying, well, my God, at least he's safe, and he's sending money home. When he was on the street, nothing. Never mind that they were part of a school-to-prison pipeline that identified these young black and brown men as prisoners by looking at, and do your research, this is common knowledge, looking at 3rd and 4th grade reading scores in inner city schools to determine not how many universities to build, but how many prisons to build. The private prison industry is thriving. And going back to the age of activism in Trump, 2 days after the election, my son pointed out to me that the stock in private prisons had jumped 50%. Happy days are here again. Even though there was a question of reform and everything that was going on in terms of the Obama administration and people starting to talk about mass incarceration and what was going on in certain states, reforming, and people talking about reentry and just doing that. My film, Chapter and Verse, that I'll get you a copy, maybe we can screen one day, is all about a guy coming home from prison trying to rebuild his life. Because you have another terrible number that deals with the school-to-prison pipeline. For young black and brown men who are identified as prison fodder, they're punished for that. They're punished for being black, or a person of color, and poor. Punished again by a system that has inequality in sentencing. If I have 10 grams of cocaine and I'm a white kid in an Ivy League school or a good school or private college, and I get caught with that, then I'm sent to rehab and put on probation. If I'm a black kid on a street corner and I get caught with 5 grams of cocaine, I'm a drug dealer and I get 25 years in prison. Double standard of justice. Double standard for someone that you see as human and a citizen and someone who is less than. So that is that connection. And then brothers and sisters who have been in prison are punished a 3rd time. They're punished for having been punished. And so employment, schooling, housing, education, healthcare, all of that is a big, grand struggle. But that's how you treat a slave. That's not how you treat a free person. That's not how you treat a citizen. That's why tons of relief can get to Texas within a few days, and people on the island of Puerto Rico are still 75% without power, and hoping for a Christmas miracle that they can have some lights by Christmas. American citizens, but they're brown people. So we have to understand where that comes from. Now, here's a quick point. I know people have to leave. I kind of want to tie this up when we talk about movement, because yes, we need to be conscious, and yes, we need to put ourselves on the front line. You know, the Black Panther Party had a free breakfast program, which was more successful in many ways than the police patrol program, because it spoke to the hearts and minds of the people. But it also did a kind of organizing that we call pointing out the contradictions in your life and the contradictions between living in the richest nation on earth as an oppressed people. We would hear, oh, black kids are unruly, they're just not learning, they're just not as smart. Maybe it's because they're, some people who are really racist and outlanded. Maybe it's a physiological difference, their brains are smaller. And people who are in the Panther Party, who had younger kids in their family, who had younger brothers and sisters, maybe some who were parents, said, yeah, maybe it's this. Maybe if you have a teacher and you got some kindergarten kids and some 1st grade kids, and you have a teacher saying, class, 3 apples plus 2 apples equal 5 apples, and that kid's stomach is growling because they haven't had breakfast, they can't add up what 3 apples plus 2 apples equal. Why don't we give them a hot, nutritious breakfast in the morning? So with no money, and very importantly, with no permission, the Black Panther Party organized a free breakfast program. How do we do this? We went to churches, community centers, and we said, can we use your dining room and your kitchen? Some people were afraid. Many said no. But a few were brave enough to say yes. That's all it takes. Then we would go to storekeepers in the community. You make a lot of money here. We don't want money. But if you'll donate a case of eggs each week, the store down the block is going to give us a case of milk. The store 3 blocks away is going to give us a case of pancake mix. We can feed the kids who come from the families that keep your store open. Some said no, but enough said yes. And we began to feed kids. The first week, 5 kids would show up. And it was no catch. It's really a free breakfast. Then 10 kids. Then hundreds of kids. At the height of the breakfast program, the Black Panther Party was feeding 50,000 kids nationally. And as my colleague, Professor Eric Huggins likes to say, we shame local government, the Board of Education, and government across the country to do more. All of your free breakfast programs that exist and your free lunch programs comes from this idea that some young black men and women called the Black Panther Party figured out that kids need a hot meal. By the way, for those stores that didn't donate, you got the community to rally and to boycott them, to say we don't have to spend our money here. So when we talk about the tools of fighting back, the power of boycotting is a powerful tool. Remember, the Montgomery bus boycott broke the back of the city economically. Not only were people not spending money on public transportation, they were boycotting other businesses along the way. And they said, okay, all right, you know what? Ride the daggone bus. The anti-apartheid movement. When people around the world began to figure out we can't do business, and then on a local level, people stopped doing business with people who were doing business with companies that were doing business without South Africa, it made a difference. Students began to challenge their universities, saying, we'll go on strike. We'll stop paying tuition. We've examined your portfolio. You do business with companies who do business with South Africa. And it became a worldwide economic boycott. That was coupled with grassroots action on the ground, political action within the legislature, and international pressure. And the people of South Africa said, you know what? You know what? We've lived with apartheid. We get it. That's the way we've done. But listen, the economy is breaking. And apartheid ended. A lot of people don't know, and not enough people know this, and I'm surprised by this, that a student-led movement at Columbia University, started by a group of conscious students, one white student, other students join in, and then faculty join in, started demonstrating and protesting, and that about 2.5, 3 years ago, Columbia University was forced to divest, listen, its portfolio from any company that was doing business with private prisons. This is a powerful thing, but you've got to do the link. You can't just say, oh, it's just because I'm black, or it's just because I'm Asian, or it's just because I'm South Asian, or it's just because I'm, you know, I'm LGBT. No, you have to understand what this Rainbow Coalition is about. So give me a minute. I want to kind of tie it up because this is really important. At the point when you realize that, at the point when you realize what all power of the people mean, is when you become a clear and present danger, as the United States military likes to call it, to the United States of America. Let me give you an example. Dr. Martin Luther King organized around racial lines brilliantly for many, many years. He gave a tremendous speech, which at the March of Washington, we revere. It's the I Have a Dream speech. But to me, an equally great speech, if not greater, was given almost 1 year previously at Riverside Church, where Dr. King gives a brilliant speech about poverty, racism, and war. He connects those 3 things, brothers and sisters. This is important. He connects economic exploitation with racial injustice and war, the three main evils that we have to deal with, and you've got to address those things together. When Dr. King was murdered, he was in Memphis and moving back and forth between Memphis and Chicago, organizing black and white sanitation workers to strike. He was talking about a poor people's campaign. He had entered the labor movement. He was getting white workers and black workers to talk about, why are we all catching hell? If we're in a bread factory and we're making 1,000 loaves of bread a week, and then at the end of the week, the owner comes out, and there's 100 of us, and he tosses out a few loaves of bread, and then looks at me and go like, well, if it wasn't for all these white workers, I could give you more. And it goes to the white workers. If it wasn't for all these, black workers, N-word. I'm scared to say the word because of Dr. Conyers, but you know what I mean. And then goes to the other workers and said, if it wasn't for all these Latinos, I could give you more bread. And the real question, instead of us fighting against each other about, yeah, you right, white boy, you right, black boy, Negro, you white. Instead of going, if we're making all the bread, why don't we have more bread? Let's organize around that. When you start doing that the way Dr. King did, when Dr. King critiqued the war in Vietnam as a war of capitalist exploitation, he was gone within a year. Malcolm X was the chief minister of the Nation of Islam, and he said unapologetically, the white man is the devil. Malcolm X barely got a parking ticket. When he left the Nation of Islam and formed the Organization of African American Unity and started talking about international solidarity, African states coming together. But here's the key thing. A lot of people says, oh, Malcolm says he doesn't hate white people anymore because when he came back from Mecca, he said, I prayed with white Muslims, I prayed with Chinese Muslims, I prayed, so I no longer believe that. More so than that, Malcolm gives a brilliant speech at Oxford University 6 months before he was murdered, where he talked about class struggle and armed struggle. Class struggle, where all people are struggling against a system of injustice. He was dead within 6 months. And when the Black Panther Party said all power to the people, and the Panthers began organizing, and so you had groups like Students for a Democratic Society, which was white. When Fred Hampton had, and you could go online and look up a little YouTube video called Black Panthers and Hillbillies, where a brother that Fred Hampton trained is up in the Ozark Mountains, and at the end of it, you have white working class people or unemployed people says, I don't know what anybody else will say, but them Panthers here, they're my brothers. We're going to work together. And Fred Hampton organizes the biggest Latino gang in Chicago, thousands and thousands, called the Young Lords. Him and Cha-Cha Jimenez. I was on the phone with Brother Cha-Cha yesterday. And they become a revolutionary organization. You're talking about the liberation of Puerto Rico and socialism. And Fred was brilliant at bringing different groups together. White, black, brown, yellow. Now Fred is talking now to the Blackstone Rangers, right? About 50,000 strong. The Egyptian Lords, about 30,000 strong. Already organized the Young Lords, about 10,000 strong. Chicago police did the math. There's 30,000 of us, there's 100,000 gang members. If Fred Hampton was allowed to turn them all into revolutionaries, we will lose the city. And they murdered him in his sleep at 21 years old. The Panthers organized something called the United Front Against Fascism. It was an amazing conference where activists came from all over the country. And they understand you need a rainbow coalition to really fight injustice. You need to organize people about what they have in common. And yes, there are things particular to the black community and the Latino community and all other communities. Racism is an ugly, ugly, fast-moving cancer. But there are things that connect us all. There are reasons why this happens. There's a reason why there's so many people suffering, and every morning when you wake up, if you put on CNN or MSNBC or any of those channels, when they go, stock market breaks another record. Well, as the stock market is breaking records in oppression, our communities are breaking records in suffering. in terms of the number of our children that are not getting educated, that are not getting health care, people who are not getting jobs. How can this be? There used to be, even in the Black Panther Party, we use, a socialist analysis of the economy where we talked about the proletarian who was the worker, the petty bourgeoisie that was the middle class, and the bourgeoisie that was the ruling class. What middle class? You have poor and you have the working poor. There was a time when Dr. Conyers and I grew up where if your dad had 2 jobs, or if your mom and dad was working, that meant you were good. You had a little college fund, and your family probably had a little weekend house. Usually it was the down south house, right? Because they're going to go back down south to retire. Now you need 2 jobs just to survive. And everybody can count the number of paychecks they are away from being homeless. Credit has become a chain. A. Trap Brown talks about this brilliantly in terms of what's happened with slavery and what we need to deal with. The scary part, that they have taken the chains off of our ankles and our wrists and placed them on our minds. And when I talk to younger audiences, I get them to call out some of the modern forms of slavery. And it's great. The kids will talk about drug addiction and hatred and racism and all of that. But now I'm talking to scholars, to people who are in college and hopefully grad school and beyond that. And it's more insidious than that. You have to look at what the whole system of credit to get people to pay for their own oppression, to make sure you'll never get out of debt. Students, you'll never get out of debt. Working class people, you will never get out of debt. You will always have to keep making the system work, because I'm going to make it easy for you by giving you a little piece of plastic and telling you can have whatever you want. And I'm going to mess with the interest rates and mess with you, right, so that you will never be free of this. So that for the $1,000 that I've lent you, you're going to have to pay $5,000 to pay back that $1,000. And if you want to see it in its worst form, go buy some furniture. Oh my God, the furniture stores. I had, one of my relatives, I had to go pay the furniture bill. I'd like, pay me back. In fact, you don't have to pay me back, but this is ridiculous. Do you realize that when this couch is broken down and sitting on the street, you'll still be paying for it? This couch that they told you that you thought you were getting, this little living room set for $900, sis, have you done the math? This is going to cost you $8,000 if you stay on their plan. So there's so many things that we have to look at, but I want to bring it back just to say, and we're going to open up for questions in a second, that this idea of the military, prison, economic, capitalist, industrial complex can only be beaten. And what Trump has done was a wake-up call, and I think the other part of the wake-up call is that we started to realize that although we felt better with Obama and he had the ability to make us feel good, that if a train is headed off the tracks, the only thing the engineer can do is maybe slow it down just a little bit. So this ain't all Trump. And we're happy to be able to say that, yes, we had a black president, but this ain't all Trump in terms of what's happening militarily, what's happening with policing, the militarization of police, and all of that. And even when Obama tried to do some social good, there were so many forces, what we call it a movement of reaction, that not very much happened. And then when he got frustrated, he started writing executive orders to try to do something at the end of his second term. And as you can say, those are easily discarded. So we need a grassroots movement. We need to understand what Martin Luther King understood. We need to understand what Harriet Tubman understood, because she was a hell of an organizer. Keep in mind, who was part of that Underground Railroad? What were the stops along the way? There were white people, there were black people, there were brown people, there were freed slaves. There were people who were born free men that could have free men and women that could have lost everything. And she understood how to build that coalition. That wasn't just a black-only operation. She knew how to build that coalition and that movement and run that up. So that coalition building that Harriet understood, that Sojourner understood, that Dr. King understood, that Malcolm X understood, that Fred Hampton understood, that our best organizers understood, is what we have to do in the age of Trump. Let's understand who the real enemy is. And lastly, let's understand the greatest motivating factor in revolution. Ask any person in the Black Panther Party, what is the number one thing you were taught to believe? And we studied. There was the 10-point program you had to memorize, the 26 rules of discipline. I told you they gave me a stack of books, and it didn't stop that first day. So I read Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral, Che Guevara, Marx, Lenin, Malcolm X. But if you ask anybody in the Black Panther Party, if you could sum it up in one sentence, in a few words, of what you were taught to believe, of what made your heart beat, of what motivated you, among all other things, every member of the Black Panther Party will answer this question the same way. We were taught to have an undying love for the people, to serve the people mind, body, and spirit. And for Panthers and for all activists, that's what made us get up at 6 o'clock, get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning when it was freezing cold. And believe me, we were in those same tenements. We didn't get special condos because we were Panthers. Get up and throw some cold water in your face and go across town to cook breakfast for kids that weren't your kids biologically, but you understood those were your children. Then you were out in the community organizing, going to where you were, whether it was the free health clinic, whether it was the clothing program, whether it was community patrol. And then when you were exhausted after doing that work, as you were riding on that bus or in that car, and you saw the cops had that black man or that woman up against the wall with their guns out to make you get off that bus, to stand between that drawn gun of the police and that person against the wall for someone that you didn't know by name, but you understood that was your brother and your sister. That's love. That was undying love for the people. So class awareness, undying love, that motivation. And I end with a story that Sister Jenkins told that young man, that guy who came from that small town and went up north and came back with a lot of gossip and tried to play her. And she said, I want to tell you a story. She said it was about a little boy who went with his family to the state fair. She said, you know what I'm talking about, baby. They had the little roller coaster, the little Ferris wheel, the little merry-go-round. But the thing that caught this little boy's attention the most was a man that was giving away balloons, an old man. And he had a bunch of balloons in a helium tank, and there was so many kids trying to get the balloons because he was giving his balloons away. That a red balloon got away, and it floated up and up and up. And a few seconds later, a green balloon got away, and it floated up and up and up. And the little kid couldn't take it anymore. He broke through the crowd. He pulled on that old man's leg. He said, Mr. Balloon Man, did you see that? The red balloon went just as high as the green balloon. That old man looked down at that little boy and he said, son, always remember this. It is not the color on the outside, but surely the stuff on the inside that's going to make you rise. Let's remember that, brothers and sisters. That's what will make us rise.
Thank you, brother. Well, I hope you learned something. You know, I always love to hear my brother speak. I mean, there was a time when he had an apartment in the village. We used to go to his apartment and have some conversations in that apartment. Boy, you remember that, brother? Right. You know, I'll never forget. That was back in the days, you know, myself and Frank Garcia and other people back in the days. Oh, by the way, I just want to mention, I'm going to say this publicly. Brother Ron Tyson sends you greetings. Oh, yeah. You know, I was with him on the train this morning. And by the way, I hired him. He teaches here. You know, so, and we want to talk to you about that and some things we might be developing in the future. Once again, let's hear it for our brother. Please give him, you know, quite often we don't show the people that we respect and love the respect and love that they should get when they're alive. We wait until after they're gone. And sometimes it's necessary to give it to them while they're here so that they know that we appreciate them, that they understand that we appreciate their contribution, their struggle. And as I said earlier, generally there is no reward for struggle. We struggle because we want to. I mean, we don't expect to get a reward. The reward that we get is freedom, it's liberation. But quite often it's a lonely thing. And I'm so happy that Brother Jemal said some of the things that he said here today, because it makes me feel good that other people get to hear it, and so that I don't have to feel so crazy all the time. You know, it's a lonely thing because people hear me say things. You know what I'm talking about. You've been in my. I mean, people hear me say these things and they look at me like, this boy is insane. And you have to run the gauntlet even here at a university like this, even with your colleagues. You know, the panels that I've sat on here and all of the hate mail that I've received and the misquotes from CNN, seeing myself on TV saying things that I didn't say, you know, taken out of context. Y'all know about some of that. I mean, just last year it happened. So I'm so happy that the brother has been here to not only reaffirm me, but to give you information that is vital to your life chances. The more you, listen, let me just say, you know, it's often been said that what you don't know won't hurt you. I'm here to tell you, and Brother Jemal will tell you, what you don't know can and will hurt you. It'll hurt you severely. So with that being said, we're going to bring Jemal back up, and he'll field a few questions for you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask those questions, and let's conclude by doing that. Come on up, brother. Any questions?
Thank you for that question, sister. There's no substitute for people being in the room together and doing the work together. And social media is amazing in terms of the ability to stay connected and the ability to share information. Sadly, a lot of people, and before we even get to the movement, with young people, I run a youth program in Harlem, Dr. Kanye's mentioned earlier, called Impact Repertory Theater, where we bring young people around the creative arts and activism. A lot of kids talk about all the friends they have and all the relationships and gossips and everything that's going on, and they never even leave their bedroom, right? These are all online friends. They're not real kind of relationships. And so the same thing happens in the movement where a lot of people know a lot, but what they're doing is reposting, tweeting, giving their opinions. There's no substitute for mass demonstration. There's no substitute for being in the community, working around certain issues. So the breakfast program is a great example of how people got out, and then it wasn't just Panthers that were serving breakfast. It was community folks. It was grandmothers. It was other people taking that example back to it. The free health clinic that the Panthers started was organizing doctors and nurses, and they would, on their days off, come and volunteer time at the Panther office. They would bring some medicine along. We call it liberating some medicine. And they started doing testing for hypertension, lead poisoning, sickle cell anemia. My oldest son, who has a graduate degree in film from Columbia, has sickle cell anemia. And so he's an activist around and helped organize a conference that dealt with patients and caregivers. And I'm sitting in the back at a conference that he organized. An older white doctor who I had never met before, so didn't know that I was in the audience, starts his comments by saying, opens the conference by saying, were it not for the Black Panther Party, the awareness about sickle cell would not be what it is today. They were the first to do the testing. They were the first to bring about the awareness. So young activists need to find those grassroots issues to begin to organize people around to point out the contradictions. Let me be a little bit more specific. Ideas like freedom and liberation are grand, but if people are struggling, these are lofty things. If you're struggling from day to day, freedom to someone whose stomach is growling is a meal. Liberation to someone that's huddled in the cold with no place to stay is a warm, dry place to sleep. So if you begin organizing around food, around housing, around education, around having, you know, in those days we called them liberation schools. But whether you call it community schools or that kind of tutoring where kids are having a safe space around people who care, that are there kind of consistently, not just to get a little bit of extra credit because it fills the, you know, the community service part of your degree, but because this is really who you are. That's what we do. And also being in the room together to talk about these different issues. So when the kids at Columbia would take over the university back in the day, and it was a hotbed, Columbia would go up like that. But then they would open the doors and make sure Panthers were there, Lords were there, and people from the African Congress. And then we wind up in one of those dorm rooms late at night, sharing some food, and then talking about what was going on. So the sisters in the women's movement learned what we were talking about in the black community in terms of police brutality. We in the Black Panther Party were hearing from the sisters in the women's movement about what was going on, what they were fighting for, about misogyny, male chauvinism. And folks were bringing these things back to their communities, understanding we have to fight all of these things, and these things were manifesting. So people need to be in the same room. People need to locate around specific work that they're doing and understand that houses are built brick by brick, movements are built brick by brick and step by step. So it may not be the grand vision or that grand demonstration. Those have to happen too, but that day-to-day work is transformative. We meet young people today that said, the Panthers fed me breakfast and gave me some books to read. And this is why I am who I am today, and they're in all walks of life. So that's the organization. The other thing about social media that's really important, thank you for this, because this is something clearly to talk about that I didn't talk about. The FBI had a program called the Counterintelligence Program, COINTELPRO, that was used to destroy the movement. And the prime targets of that was the Black Panther Party, but the American Indian movement. But you'll see COINTELPRO, counterintelligence, was used against the civil rights movement and other stuff. So intelligence is when you send people in to gather some information. Okay, they're going to do some stuff. There's some bad actors, as the FBI likes to say, we're going to move on them. Counterintelligence is we have a meeting like we have today, and everything is good. And then we leave the meeting, and somebody comes in my ear and whispers, hey, man, I know Dr. Connors was showing you a lot of love, but you should hear what he says about you when you're not here. He says that, you know, that you're opportunist, that you're power-driven, and that you want to take control of the whole organization, right? You should watch how he looks at you the next time you're in the room. Somebody else is going to Dr. Connors saying, hey, man, I know Jemal came and showed you a lot of love, talked about how long you go back, but he said somewhere along the way they turned you and you might be an informer or an undercover cop. Look at how Jemal looks at you the next time you're there. Now, the next time we're together, we're like this, right? The counterintelligence program led to the arrests, the imprisonment, the killing of a number of people in the movement. So I talked about the murder of Fred Hampton, but that information was given by a guy who was Fred Hampton's bodyguard, who was an FBI informant that gave them the whole layout of the Chicago apartment where Fred Hampton was killed. This brother later, he was the one that was, Dr. Conyers, he was the one that was on Eyes on the Prize, they get it? Yeah. And he felt so bad about everything, I think a year later he committed suicide, you know? So when you look at that, the Panther 21, one of my, I was in a section called the Bronx section because that's where I lived. My section leader, who's like your sergeant or your lieutenant, is someone that was on the front lines. If the cops came, he was the one ready to fight. When my grandmother found all this Panther stuff hidden under my bed and was ready to beat me to death and not let me come back, he came, sat with Grandma, convinced her to let me come back, said he would look out for me. When we were arrested in the Panther 21, and there was another brother named Gene Roberts, who was Malcolm X's bodyguard, who was like 3 feet away when Malcolm got shot. He was part of an elite police unit called the Bureau Special Unit, right? Malcolm X did not know. Malcolm X's last breath was drawn from a cop, an undercover cop. He had those credentials, and he came into the Black Panther Party and became an officer. Man, you were Malcolm X's bodyguard. In the Panther 21 case, when we found out who were the witnesses against him, Gene Roberts, we found out was an undercover cop. The other one was my mentor, someone that I looked up to, not only as a Panther leader, but I had no father figure. I never knew my dad. My grandfather had passed away. So for him, I was looking like I wanted to walk like him, talk like him, be like him. Now, counterintelligence happens, and it's coming up with false websites. There's a lot of beefs that are going on between movement people, public beefs on Twitter and Instagram. There's public beefs happening, and people are kind of responding that, and there are people whose jobs it is, right? One of the times I was arrested, the cops not only knew that I had gone to yoga class with my wife that morning and that I was a martial artist, they knew what jazz club we had gone to. They were talking about, so there are people in these intelligence units at computers that are monitoring all of that, that know everything that you like, because we make everything available on social media. And then if you become a movement person, know exactly which buttons to push to get you to have this beef, and maybe even a step further. So we have to really kind of be aware of that. Brother H. Rap Brown taught me, I remember when we were in prison together, and Brother Jalil brought me into the movement, because that was the summer of '68 that he came to Minnesink and was the guest speaker, and right? And we were both in prison, and in prison, the way you would get to see someone is you would go on sick call, right? Complain you had a headache or a fever. So I'm down in sick call, and Brother Jalil is there because he had been shot, and we're talking, we're reunited, and I was like, hey, brother, I'm gonna send you a message through so-and-so and get a message through so-and-so, and he said, no, I'll meet you here next week the same time. He said, because it goes out and comes back at, too many ears are gonna be on that. So that's the other thing about social media. I didn't mean to, but that was such a great question. There's so many nuances to that, right? So just to sum it up, same room together, organize around people's needs, and make sure that in the Panthers, what we call a face-to-face relationship with folks.
Any other questions?
Well, you mean the leaders of, what was the ideology of Huey and Malcolm?
No, which one did you, like, I felt like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they kind of had, like, two different. You said one, did you emulate which one?
Yeah, so that's a great question, brother. We considered ourselves in and a lot of people in the black liberation movement, and whether they were black nationalists or revolutionaries who kind of embraced this idea of socialism and critiqued the system, considered ourselves to be standing on the shoulders of Malcolm X. But you have to keep in mind, as I said earlier, as we got older and as we saw what they were both talking about, and as they got older, please keep in mind how young these brothers were. I think they were both 39 years old, right? Neither one of them got to reach 40. Think of how young that is. But before their untimely demise, they both started critiquing the system the same way. And they weren't very far apart with what was really wrong and what we had to do. And it came back to those three things: poverty, racism, and war. So I embrace them both, talk about them both, teach them both, because they both said things along their activist career that are totally true. And then they were about to really meet, I think, and probably join forces when they started really talking about class and race, and not just race alone. Yes, this brother had his hand up.
Just in general, I mean, you guys have been doing this movement. It started off very young, and my question is, how do you get people now to have the same level of awareness, and what got you guys aware enough create that movement at that age. I feel as though people, especially, you know, just being here as advertising marketing things to students here, it seems as though like people are kind of oblivious to things, and then they'll usually get it, usually after they graduate, they become a little bit more conscious of things, but it's kind of like after. So like, what have you done, and what can be done for awareness to happen, so that people can actually create these grassroots movements? Because these are like important things that, and clearly it was important to the U.S. government to be able to do something like COINTELPRO and to feel as though they need to infiltrate in the way that they did. They saw it as an important thing. How do we get the younger people of our generation to see it as important?
So, in the words of Frederick Douglass, we have to agitate, 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 right? In the words of a young rapper that's on the come up, that's determined not to be held back, right? I gotta eat. I gotta find a way to eat. And when you're determined to find a way to eat, you find a way to eat, whatever eating means, right? And that's why we see some people pursue their careers and make it happen, and other people don't. Agitate, agitate, agitate. I think the reason why Frederick Douglass said it 3 times is because he realizes that you have to come at it several different ways. So in the movement, I think we just can't be frustrated because we may have tried to do an event, advertise it, put out some flyers, and people didn't come. I think we have to figure out, how do we get to them? One of the things that was great about the young brothers and sisters in the civil rights movement and in the Panther Party and Liberation movement is that there was always creative thinking about how to reach the people, right? If standing on the street corner passing out flyers wasn't enough, let's have a program where people can come eat, where they can get some clothing. And then for the young people, let's have a dance. The Panthers used to give some hell of a rallies, but Panthers used to give some hell of a parties. And people would come out. So you'll picture, you know, that in the Black Panther Party, they were actually Black Panther parties. And there would be bands that came and interesting people that came to kind of support what was going on. So I think we have to have that kind of level of creative thought and activity in terms of getting engaged. And then the other thing is we can't give up. I'll give you an example. One of my first jobs when I came home from prison, and I've been out for a while now, but I got a job, and Dr. Conyers mentioned that I started a theater company while I was in prison because I was also a child of the Black Arts movement. So in the movement, you would go out. When you went out, you see the Last Poets, and you would see Ornette Coleman and Sonia Sanchez. And then you see some bands that were playing like R&B, but with a revolutionary message. It was a couple of years before Gil Scott-Heron, but you know, Gil Scott-Heron type of music, right? So I formed a theater company because some brothers knew that I had done that, and I formed a theater company when I was in prison. When I came out of prison, one of my first jobs was with an organization called Changing Scenes, where there were some young men who were on probation, black teenagers, all black men, black and Latino men, and they said, can you do like a little acting theater workshop with them? I was like, yeah, I'm good. This is great. I'm ready. My resume is built for this, right? You know, I had only been out of prison for a few months, just built a theater company. I get in the room, there's about, 15 of these young men, and I have my whole idea of, first we're gonna like do some acting stuff, then we're gonna do some group writing, then at the end of it, we're gonna do like a little 15-minute play. They can invite their families. It took me about 10 minutes to realize when I was in the room with these young brothers, throw your curriculum out the window. They were so on edge. Their soul was just in the room because it was part of the program that the judge said, you do this change in scene programs or you go to jail. And the stuff that they were talking about, who they had beef with, who they was gonna get strapped, who they was gonna hurt. So I just started doing warm-ups, then we would freestyle, we would do some other things, and in between, because I realized my job wasn't to get them through the end of this cycle so we could do this little play that I thought we were gonna do. My job was to give them something so that maybe they would stay out of jail and stay alive till next week's class, right? And it's not like college or other things or even my youth program where kids audition for the right to participate. They were like, there was that wall. They were on edge. So I did it until the program lost funding. About 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, I'm walking down the street with Jemal, with my oldest son, in Harlem, and it's a hot night, and there's a young man standing by the bus. And he sees me, and he goes, "Mr. Joseph." I go, "Hey." He says, "Man, you don't remember me." He said, "I was one of them knucklehead kids in that program changing scenes." And I was trying to remember him. I was like, "No, man, you weren't a knucklehead." He says, "No, trust me, I was a knucklehead." And every week you would come with all this positive stuff, and it was garbage. He said, "But about 2 years later, it started to kick in." He says, "And I'm a husband now, a father now, and a social worker now. Thank you." So sometimes it's like gardening. Sometimes there's the seeds you plant that you see blossom, and sometimes it's the seeds that the wind takes and just blows out your hand. And you're walking down another block or maybe in the park, you go, "Man, there's some pretty flowers." And don't realize those seeds came that you didn't even know. So we can't give up. We have to be diverse in our strategy. We have to figure out how to eat, meaning what's going to work, right? And the solution may come to you in a dream, or it may come seeing somebody doing something that has to do with music or with business or with something else going like, that's an innovation we could bring to the movement. That's movement building. So alternative institutions, right? So here's the thing, right? Our Jewish brothers and sisters, if their kids are in public school, they still have to go to shul. You see what I mean? So they make sure that they learn their language, their history, who they are, right? And even in those liberal families, they have a sense of who they are. Even if they're not, religious, and they call themselves a secular Jewish person, because that was so, and they'll joke about it, even though they don't do it now, that was so inbred to have a sense of who you were. And this was true of, there's folks that I met in the community who are landlords who are just like, I'm here for the business, and they were like bad, evil people. But I'm talking about people I know who were lawyers and movement people who were super progressive, who took on those movement cases for no money. But they still knew who they were as a Jewish person. You follow what I mean? They were progressive, they were socialists, they were all of those things. So we need to not just leave it up to public schooling. It starts young, all right? Some of this can't be fixed now, unfortunately. We got some brothers and sisters, the older they get, the harder it's going to be to fix, right? And it's a lesson my wife reminded me of when we were starting Impact, because I had been volunteering at another program where we were taking the kids 16 and older. And I said, yeah, I'm going to do the same thing in Harlem. She says, you do that in Harlem, it's too late. So we started taking the children very, very young to give them a sense of community and a sense of themselves. So whatever those alternative programs are, the liberation schools, the community stuff, the little clubs you may want to organize, the black organizations, the professional organizations. I'm loving the ones that are doing mentoring. I'm loving the Greek organizations that are doing the mentoring. I'm seeing, Omega Psi Phi, with their Black College store. It's relentless. I had a lot of my kids. So they kind of understand that. And that's not, they don't do that with the mindset that, all the young men are going to become Qs, right? The sisters in Delta, Delta Sigma Theta, they have like a lot of great kind of mentoring programs, but a lot of organizations. First Corinthian Baptist Church, where I go to church in Harlem. Mike Waldron is a truly progressive young minister. He has a breakfast program, modeled after the Panther Party. They have a prison ministry. They have a food program where every Friday they feed the community. He gave us the numbers one week. It's amazing how much food. They just did a clothing mall where people could come, and they had it set up where you could have racks. They had shoppers to help people do that. Then they gave people a meal, stuff that you can do in the community. And he said, if you're not about service, you're coming to the wrong place, right? The motto of that church is live, love, serve, right? And, you know, I've been a friend of Pastor Mike. He's actually is a fraternity brother. He's a Q, I'm a Q. I've never heard him talk about hell and damnation, but I've heard him talk about social justice. In fact, the first time I heard Your Life Matters was after the Trayvon case, when he told me he had to call his son in college and said, Trey, your life matters. As your father, I just needed to know that there's a reason I made you read Malcolm X and just doing, you know, all the stuff we did. He says, and it may not seem like it matters, but it matters. So institutions, but individuals, right? Again, my organization that just turned 20 for the young people, Impact Repertory Theater, is something that my wife and I and two friends started with our own money. And we have had some estimates, 3,000 young people pass through. We just did our 20th, and they are now educators. Some are in medicine, some in law. And we create something, again, the idea of they go through a little boot camp process. And Dr. Conyers and I are both part of rites of passage programs, something called a cadet corps, rite of passage fraternities. He's part of, you know, Penn and Scroll Military Fraternity. I'm part of something called the Order of the Feather Fraternity. These were things where you had older black men corral us and discipline us, right? But in order to join, we had to serve. So we had this model of black men, and it was expected. In fact, they made it clear, we will whip your ass if you don't go to college, right? So they put the fear of God. Plus, there were some guys that had literally beat our butts anyway, so we knew we had to keep on the path to do that. All those things matter. All those little groups, you may not think it matters that, you know, you meeting with, you know, say with girls, right? Say with 6 girls that you're mentoring, and you give yourselves a little name, and you do something, and you watch certain movies together, like To Help, and, you know, the documentary about Angela Davis, and y'all talk about what it is to be a young woman, and what Black BDU is as a part of this, and why you don't have to be a hoochie girl. You will run into a little girl that you may have spent a year or two with when she's 10 or 11 years old, and she will stop you on the street. This happens to us all the time. And say, you don't remember me. And you go like, I was in that little girls group. And she'll be saying stuff to you like, I'm a lawyer now. I'm a teacher now. This happens all the time. That is where it starts. This is where the true movement is. Oh, it's a risk that you run. Like, you know, as Dr. Conyers said in the beginning, there's not a lot of rewards for being an activist, but there's a lot of punishment. You kind of have to be ready for that. There's a great documentary, by the way, that's on HBO called Baltimore Rising, right? Please watch this documentary. It was done by my friend, a sister named Sonia Sohn. She was on, she played Kima. The Wire, right? Yeah, she was on The Wire. She played Kima on The Wire, right? And so she's moved to Baltimore. She's originally from Virginia. Then she lived in New York because she's a spoken word artist, obviously a great actress. And this is her directing debut, and she's got real active. And so she follows. This is perfect. I'm glad you asked these questions. She follows like 4 young activists from the Freddie Gray trial, from the Freddie Gray murder, you know, the brother that they rode around in the back of the van, all the way through his trial. And she follows their lives and their activism, and it's great. It will inspire you. It'll let you know. One brother, like, got fired from his job. He had a good job working in one of the hotels. He was clocking, like, I think he said 55, 60K a year. Not bad for a single young black man in his 20s. To having dinner with his parents, and his parents getting on him, going like, well, maybe if you had a job, we wouldn't have to be buying you dinner. And he was like, but Mom, Dad, this is my job, out here organizing. So it's good to see. Well, you got to build your networks, because for the job that fires you, right, if you're doing the right thing, there's a lot of conscious brothers and sisters working in other places that will embrace you. But you just have to know that that's part of what you have to do as an activist, is understand that the more you stand up, the more that attention that you're going to attract. So you do have to be aware of what you post on social media. You do have to be aware if it comes back to your job and if you're directly criticizing your job on social media, because keep this in mind, right? And I'm not, a heavy-duty social media person, right? I'm not, deliberately not, right? But I do know this. Even in what I do as a filmmaker, there are actors that tell me that when they go for an audition, there's people looking at them to see how many followers they have. If I give them the role, right, you might be the better actress, but, she's got 100,000 followers, so I might give her the role. But also, when you apply for a job, when you apply for certain programs, people are going on looking at your social media profile. So if you act in one way, for the interview and your resume is one way, but you are out and clowning and loud and gossiping and cussing on Facebook, that's going to harm you as well. So I think be the same way, the same person all the time, so that you can make a case for integrity wherever you go. And that you can even flip that and saying, the things that I believe in, I fight for, and if I'm part of your organization, know that I'm fighting just as hard. And I understand that this is work, and this is, what I'm doing on my off time. All right.
Brother, I don't know how to thank you, and you will be back. I'm going to talk with you about working on some projects here, maybe one of your plays or whatever it is. But we have several things to do before we leave. Number one, Brother Jemal does have some books here. Now, I think he has 10 books, and I'm claiming 5 right off the top. So don't get, so you can, if you want to see him afterwards, he'll sign the books for you. The second thing that we'll do is, David, could you get Lisa in here? We always, with all of our speakers, take a group picture. These are important memories. Remember Tony Rico yesterday saying about 30 years ago, he saw a picture when he was in law school with some famous other professors, and you forget about that. And quite often I see a picture of myself as a young man with Dr. Ben or with Asa Hilliard or with Sonia Sanchez, and I didn't even know how the picture was taken. I just happened to be there. And I'm so grateful that I had the experience to be around brothers like Jemal. And he's one of the people who inspires me. I mean, there have been so many. Abiodun Oyewule, Sonia's. I mean, the names and the people that I've been around who inspired me makes it all worth what I do. Sometimes I feel like giving it up and moving on. And I'll always be an activist, but I'll do something else. I'll leave the university, and Jemal comes and inspires me to make me hang in there a little bit longer because it's all worth it. So what we want to do right now is we're going to go up on the stage, and we're going to take this group picture as a part of our memory. And then Jemal can sign some books if you want to buy some books. And I think you should. But one other thing, it just dawned on me. Before we do that, Jemal, could you recommend besides your book, a book that people can read on the Black Panther Party? The first book that I ever read on the Black Panther Party, as far as I can recall, was Earl Anthony's book, Picking Up the Gun. And it's a good book, and Earl is still around, right? Did he pass? Okay, yeah. But that was the first book that I ever read, and I was told to read it by Abiodun Oyewule. So it was way back. And so could you recommend a book that everybody might want to read besides yours?
One of the great books was written by the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, Bobby Seale.
Yeah, Seize the Time. I read that too. Yeah, Seize the Time. So that's also. So pick up these books. You got to do some reading.
There's another one by Dr. Alondra Nelson.
Right.
Called Body and Soul.
Okay.
Dr. Alondra Nelson is a leading sociologist and a dean at Columbia University.
Yeah.
And it's all about the Black Panther Party health program.
And I know my classmate at Temple University, Regina Jennings, who was a Black Panther Party member in California, has written a lot, I don't know about books, but a lot of articles on her experience in the Panther. Do you know Regina? Yeah, she's written a lot of books on her experience in the Panther Party. So let's get up on the stage and take this picture.